Hello, hope you're having a fantastic day. I'm Rob from HomeStudioCenter.com, and today I'm going to be talking to you all about range allocation. And this is a technique that a lot of people use. Some people know of it as frequency slotting. And it's essentially the act of giving each instrument or vocal, or at least the most important parts, their own space within the frequency spectrum, their own corner of the mix, as to say. And this really helps with separation. It really helps to clear up your mix. It helps you to think about mixing in the right way, about where your EQ cuts and boosts are as well. So by the end of this video, you're going to feel really confident with this technique, and hopefully it's going to improve your mixes. So this is part 5 of an 8-part series, which I call the 1 month EQ challenge. My challenge to you is to drastically improve one of your mixes within the span of 28 days. You get access to 8 tutorials in total, and you can sign up to that by clicking the link on the video or in the description, or by going to 1montheqchallenge.com. There's some cool bonuses as well. In part 1, you learned all about the fundamentals of EQ and the 4 key approaches. In part 2, you learned about bringing separation and clarity to your mixes. Part 3 was all about fixing muddy mixes. Part 4 was all about fixing thin mixes. And then this is part 5, all about range allocation. So let's dive in. Well, what is range allocation? So I gave you a brief summary before, and I call it range allocation because you're not just slotting frequencies. That term frequency slotting, it makes it sound like you're aggressively slotting instruments into a certain frequency range. But it's not. It's a much subtler act. You're allocating a range of the frequency spectrum to an instrument. And once you've allocated that range, or a vocal, and once you've allocated that range to a part, you just want to be wary that you don't boost anything else in that range, and also that you cut other things in that range to give the part a bit more space. And again, you only want to do this with the most important parts. If you went and did this with every single element of your mix, it would take forever. You only want to do it either on the vocals, the lead guitar, and maybe the bass and kick, the snare, things like that, the most important parts. But also you can do it on group buses. So I like to mix backwards. I start with the mix bus and then I do my processing on my group buses, which are here. And I'm going to talk to you all about that in the next part of this series. It's called backwards mixing. But what I do quite a lot of the time is use range allocation on the group buses as well. So before I go into the kind of the finesse of this technique, just remember you're not doing it with every single individual channel. That'll take you too long. You're only doing it with the most important parts and maybe on the group buses as well. So all the guitars at once or all the keys at once, for example. So first example I'm going to give is vocals. So if we take a listen to this vocal part here, I'm going to, for now, just load up this EQ. I'm going to keep everything else on. So on this EQ here, we've already spoke about most of these boosts and cuts in earlier videos. I'll just summarize again. So we've got a low cut here just to help the vocal shine through a bit more and cut through a bit better in the mix. Got a low mid cut just to remove some of the mud. And then we've got a top end boost to add some clarity. And then we briefly spoke about this high mid boost in the first video, where I said about creating space and referenced this technique. So we're going to look at that in a bit more detail now. So first of all, how did I find this? Well, I had an intention. I was listening to the vocal and I wanted to boost somewhere in the high mids to help it cut through the mix. And I thought about the elements of that were already there, and I thought about the elements I wanted to enhance. And this vocal, it had some aggression to it, but I wanted to dial in more aggression. I wanted to help it cut through the mix a bit more. It's quite a soft song, but I still felt like the vocal could have a bit more aggression and a bit more bite to it. So I already knew I was going to be boosting somewhere in the upper mids. So first of all, to find the pleasing element and to find the range that you're going to allocate to this part, I just dial in a boost like this, maybe 3 or 4 dBs, a bit more exaggerated than you end with, just so you can hear it clearer. I'm going to solo this. I would have done this in the context of the mix, not in solo, which is important, but for the sake of demonstration, I'm going to put it in solo so you can hear. And all I'm going to do is, I know I want to be in the upper mid, so it's going to be somewhere between 4 and 7K. I'm just going to move this around until I find an area that sounds nice.
Too much to handle, conversation, don't know where to go. Feeling like a slow burning candle, the end is inevitable. Tell me what you're thinking, 'cause I can't seem to work it.
So there at 6K, I feel like in solo it might sound a bit too much. We're also going to back this off a bit, but I know that in the context of the mix, that boost at 6K helped it to cut through, gave it a bit more aggression. At 7K, I feel like it's a bit too high. We're getting more into like the top end, and that's not really what I want to boost. I want to boost the kind of high mid aggression. Down at 4K, it sounded nice, but I didn't feel like it cut through enough. It wasn't enough bite. It was a different kind of element of sound. So 6K was the area that I liked the most. After that, of course, you dial back the boost, probably somewhere around 2 dB or 1 dB would what I would settle on. Play with the width as well. Generally with boost you want to be a bit wider, but just have a listen to how that affects it.
Much to handle, conversation, don't know where to go. Feeling like a slow burning candle.
So it sounds a bit more musical, a bit more natural when it's wide, but we still want to be have that bite and that aggression, so somewhere between the two works well. So now I know that 6K boost on the vocal sounds nice. So I can write that down. If I get a pen now, this is a good trick. If you're just starting out with this technique, write it down. Vocal, 6 kilohertz. So now, when I'm going through and processing my other channels, or on the group buses, I know not to boost 6K on anything. If anything, I want to do the opposite. I want to cut 6K. So what I actually ended up doing on this mix, and I showed you this in part 1, is I ended up cutting 6K on all the instruments. So all of these instrument parts, so drums, kicks, all bass, verse guitars, chorus guitars, keys, they're all going to this stereo aux bus here called all instruments. So I'm literally cutting 6K out of everything. It's only subtle. This is why I don't like to call it frequency slotting, because I'm only cutting by 1 dB. And on that vocal, I was only boosting by 1 to 2 dB. We're not literally slotting in. We're just allocating that range to the vocals and then considering that throughout the mix. So another good example is kick and bass. So if you find that the kick sounds, it's got a nice sub bass to it, and you want a track to have a bit more of a groovy, dancey feel to it, you could write down kick and 60 hertz. So if the kick is at 60 hertz, you don't want the bass to be prominent in that frequency range. So maybe the bass sounds nicer, and it's the notes that it's playing and the tone of the bass sounds really nice around 120 hertz. So you write that down. And now you're probably going to cut 60 in the bass because that's where the kick is allocated, and you're going to cut 120 in the kick because that's where the bass is allocated. And there's just examples of this throughout this mix. On the keys, for example, on the group bus, I'm boosting at 652 hertz because nothing else was really in that area, occupying that area of the mids. So I decided to boost there. And then compare that to the guitars, for example. So let's look at the verse guitars. And you can see the verse guitars I'm cutting at 5.5. So again, that's around that area of the vocal. I'm boosting them at 1.5. So that's their allocation, 1.5. So I can write that down, guitars, 1.5 kilohertz. And again, same technique. I would have just found that that was a nice, pleasant element of the guitar that I could enhance that wasn't already being used up by something else. And you can see in the keys, I've now cut 1.5. So that the keys and the guitars don't fight each other, we've got a cut here at 1.5 because I'm boosting the guitars at 1.5. So just constantly bear this in mind, write it down, and then when you come to EQing your individual parts or the group buses, just think about what's already been allocated, where there's space in the frequency spectrum for somewhere to sit. And again, don't go over the top of it. 2-3 dBs boost or cut here and there is all you need. You don't need to start filtering and being really aggressive. It just creates a bit more space. It gives you some structure to work to with your EQ moves rather than just randomly boosting. And if you start boosting the same frequencies on 2 different parts, you're going to get frequency masking. It's going to start to interfere with each other. So writing those down, writing those allocations down really helps you to prevent that from happening. Now, one last tip for this technique, try to do it with your ears as well. So when you are boosting and finding frequencies to boost and to allocate, some people will use a frequency analyzer. So I don't actually have one. I never use spectrum analyzers. But Logic Pro, for example, the EQ there comes with one. FabFilter, their EQ has a spectrum analyzer. And it's tempting to have a look at that spectrum analyzer and see where the main notes are. So, for example, you put it on your kick drum, you have a look, and maybe the biggest peak is at 60 hertz. So then you think, okay, well, I need to cut 60 hertz and everything else. But this is dangerous because all that means is the fundamentals at 60 hertz. And if you start boosting the fundamental, first of all, that's going to sound weird. It's probably not going to help the tone. And cutting the fundamental in other stuff does help. But then when you get to the common instruments that are in the low mid range, which we spoke all about in the video on muddy mixes, like guitars, acoustic guitars, the upper range of a bass guitar, male vocals, even female vocals, they're all sitting around the same space. They're all going to have very similar fundamentals. So you quickly run out of space in the low mids. So instead you have to look to the high mids and the mids around 6 to 1 kilohertz and everything around that area for your allocations, because you can't just allocate fundamentals because everything's going to be in the low mids, and then all your allocations are going to be really close to each other in that low mid range between 100 and 300 hertz. So try to do it with your ears, find a boost that sounds nice in the mids, and then cut it in other things. Please do implement this technique in your mixes. I think it will really help you, especially writing them down like that is a great way to get started. After a while, you'll just remember, and when it comes to boosting, you'll think, I've already boosted that somewhere else, so I'm not going to do it. But it really does help to write it down. Hope you found that useful. If you want to get access to all 8 parts of this series on EQ, which is called the 1 month EQ challenge, you can sign up with the link on the video you see now or the link in the description, or you can just go to 1montheqchallenge.com. It's completely free. You get access to 8 tutorials, some cool bonuses as well, like DAW templates, a private video on EQ and vocals to sound expensive and ready for the radio, and also you will get a copy of my popular ebook on EQ. All of that's completely free. Go sign up and I'll notify you when the next video is ready. The next part is going to be all about EQ and compression and the relationship between EQ and compression. I'm going to finally answer the big question, which is EQ before or after compression. I've got quite a quirky take on this. I don't actually do either, and I'm going to explain all in the next video. Don't forget to subscribe on YouTube as well. Like this video if you found it helpful. Leave a comment below if you've got any questions and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. And can't wait to see you in the next part.